There's a new book out talking about a football team that at one time had the national record for consecutive win streaks, and they have the South Dakota record, 61 wins in a row, the Claremont Honkers. They did it 1947 to 1953, and the book is titled Six, and its author joins us on the KWSN fan line. Marc Rasmussen joins us from Seattle, Washington. Marc, congratulations on the book, and good afternoon to you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Your dad was on that Claremont Honkers team, right?
Yeah, he was the quarterback for the one game that they lost in the Bill Welsh dynasty. So I frequently remind him of that part, but then he reminds me he was in 2 losing football teams or games in his entire career in college and high school. So
wow.
I guess that's not bad.
No.
Marc, you graduated from USD. You're in the banking business out in Washington. Where did you graduate high school from?
I was, strangely enough, I was graduated in Hecla, South Dakota, which was the team that ultimately beat Claremont. So we got there kind of back door, but it is one of those things that was a real conflict with me as I wrote the book. Well, maybe not so much conflict, but...
Why did you decide to write a book about, by the way, the book is called Six, and we'll tell you how you can get it in a moment, but what made you decide to write a book about the Claremont Honkers?
Well, you mentioned my father, and the truth is I was intent on nominating him to the South Dakota Sports Hall of Fame. And, to do that, I wanted to make sure that I researched it adequately and had the correct data in hand. And as I did it, I kept uncovering these elements of a story that was just too darn nice not to write a book about. It was just a lot of fun, and the elements involved were, the stuff that makes a book good.
I heard been told that there was a social aspect to the high school football games there in Claremont. Those games were all in the afternoon. There were no lights on the football field. When Claremont decided that the football game was done and they destroyed their opposition, they hosted the team and the parents for supper afterwards. Did you hear about that at all?
Yes, actually, that was one of and this was truly one of the big things was when Hecla beat them ultimately after 61 straight. You would have thought that Claremont won just because they were so, they were helped them celebrate that moment, and then the parents had kind of an impromptu party and invited all the parents from the Claremont team, and it was impressive enough that Al Newharth, who at that point was running Sodak Sports, had written about the sportsmanship aspect of that game, and it was pretty phenomenal just how it was all put together.
Was it always just after that game, or was it after every game that Claremont had finished?
They frequently did, but that was the one that received the most notoriety. That's the one that was written up as one of the feature editorials in the Sodak Sports magazine, just because it was so magnanimous and so unusual. He's
Marc Rasmussen. The book is called Six. A story about the Claremont Honkers football program back in 1947 to 1953, 6-man football. How did that team get so good?
Well, it was kind of the right place at the right time. In 1935, they invented 6-man football. A guy named Stephen Epler out of Nebraska, and Bill Welsh was the coach of the Claremont Honkers and grew up in the Aberdeen area and had actually been recruited to go play at the University of Illinois, and his mentor there was a guy by the name of Red Grange. And he had 1 year playing with Red Grange with that Illinois team that won the national championship the year that he was there. So he had taken that experience. He was ultimately hurt, and he came back to the Dakotas and finished up at Northern Normal College, which is now Northern State University. But Bill Welsh was the key cog that helped that team become as good as it was. And, he had gone through a number of years in coaching and had developed a nice little family with a boy that was kind of his shadow, his most important part of his life to a large degree. He and his son had been killed when he was 6 years old, when he was coaching in Forest City, Iowa. And the fallout from that death is what really was the catalyst that got Bill to Claremont. So the reason that Claremont was so good was the fact that Bill Welsh arrived at the right time and became the coach, brought the game of 6-man football with him, and he also brought that big-time football experience from Illinois. And the combination, along with some talented kids, just turned into something amazing. The first 61 games they played, they had 0 losses.
Wow. Incredible. So explain to me roughly, how does the 6-man lineup work? What do you have, 2 down linemen, 1 in the backfield, and a quarterback and 1 receiver? How do you set that up?
It's really set up 3 and 3. They've got a center and 2 ends. Then they have the quarterback, and then they would have a halfback and a fullback. So it was set up without the interior lineman, and that was done by Stephen Epler because it provided a safer environment. They were finding that a lot of the injuries that were caused by football were coming because of interior linemen. So they took that element out, and then so it left 3 on the line anytime the ball was snapped and 3 in the backfield.
When it comes to the Claremont Honkers back in that 6 years, did they just happen to also have some pretty darn outstanding athletes that helped Bill Welsh promote them to 61 games in a row?
They really did. There was one guy by the name of Donnie Gibbs who just recently died within the last 3 or 4 months. But Donnie was he was about 6 foot 3 inches tall, probably about 190, and he ran one of the fastest 100-yard dashes in the state. So in a wide open game like 6-man football, he was just devastating. In fact, he was so good that he pretty much single-handedly won the 1949 State B track meet for Claremont. He scored enough points to win the meet all by himself. So he just was a very talented individual. And there were a number of others that came along that were equally good, but, as it related to all-around athletics, Donnie Gibbs was amazing.
He's Marc Rasmussen. He's written the book 6. It's available at local bookstores, and we'll tell you how you can also get it on the web here in just a moment. What did your dad tell you, what stood out in his mind about playing football up there for the Honkers?
Well, Bill Welsh was more than just a coach to my dad. He basically rescued him from a kind of a delinquency and raised him as his own in many ways. And so he attributes that success to Bill Welsh's involvement. And, in doing the research and getting to know the family, I can see that. But the other thing was, Dad says that they just loved to play football. They loved sports, and Bill had talked about in front of one of the Rotary meetings or whatever they were having back in those days in Aberdeen. He said that they had gone and they'd played a team up in North Dakota, and they just beaten the crap out of them, but they got kind of beaten up themselves. And on the way home, the car broke down, and Bill had to get a ride into town and come back and get somebody to fix it. But in the meantime, all the boys got out of the cars and went out, and they were playing football in the field beside the cars. It was just that mentality that made them that good.
Did they get any national exposure for 61 wins in a row?
Yeah, it's really funny. One of the things that I did was I searched national databases of newspapers, and Claremont was mentioned in a lot of newspapers nationally. In fact, there was one AP writer out of New York City that had picked it up and had made some comment about Claremont. But it was really well received, and the sport of 6-man football went from obscurity in 1935 to the point where there were 5,000 plus teams playing it in, I think it was like 1949, 1950. So it became quite a phenomenon. In fact, it's still played. In Texas, there's 180 teams that are playing, and there's in a few other states. Florida's got 32 teams, and Nebraska, Montana, Wyoming, and some others. So the sport itself, still thrives. It's just that it's a much smaller scale than it once was.
Marc, what else will we learn about by getting the book 6 by Marc Rasmussen?
Well, it just the reasons why a 6-man football team could become successful. But for the 6-man football, very few of the Dakotans would have seen the sport, much less played it during that time frame, just because the rural schools were so small they could not field an 11-man team. There just wasn't the bodies and there wasn't the resources. So bringing 6-man football to the state made it possible for people like my father to get exposure to football, and I think it raised the overall popularity of the sport. And the fact that Claremont was so good at what they did, it made the level of play in football increase dramatically. And their success sparked the success of a lot of teams, and ultimately Hecla beat them, but there was no team that had been beaten more times by Claremont than Hecla anyway. So it was one of those where they provided the education that ultimately beat them.
Are you saying that it took Hecla 6 years to figure out six-man football?
Well, yeah, I hate to say that, being the Hecla rocket that I am, but yeah, that's exactly right.
Tell folks how they can get the book Six.
It's the book Six has been published by the South Dakota State Historical Society Press, and the best way to get it is to go to their webpage, which is SDS. Let's see, South Dakota State Historical Society Press. So SDSHSpress.com, and they have all the data on there. Or my personal webpage that I have for the book is 6-man.com.
What did you learn the most while researching and writing this book? What is one thing that surprised you the most about it?
Well, that my dad had understated the quality of the team and the athletes that were there. He, in his typically shy way, if you will, he just didn't really give me all that detail. So the more I received exposure to the old news stories and stuff, the more I realized just exactly what these guys accomplished. So, I was just impressed by the story. It was so much bigger than what I had originally imagined when I was younger. 127
people in Claremont now. They stopped playing six-man football there a long time ago. When did they stop playing football? You remember?
Well, actually, the school, they stopped when the school was closed, and the school actually closed in 1970. And but the kids were playing for Langford. That's kind of the way that in fact, that's the group that I played against pretty extensively when I was growing up.
Hey, Mark, good stuff. We encourage folks to get the book Six. Again, it's SDSHSpress.com. It's a fun book, and it is kind of a mystery of Claremont Honker football. And boy, it would have been great to have lived during that time to see those kids play football.